We'll just give it a few more seconds. I don't see co-chair Mike Powell on the line yet, unless I'm missing him. Kim, we'll make sure that the record notes that you were here first.
Yeah, I did not make it first.
Hey, Mike, good seeing you. All righty. Well, then, we can dive in. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Mitigation Working Group of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. I'm Mark Stewart, Climate Change Program Manager at MDE. Note that we're recording this meeting for note-taking purposes. Please mute your microphones unless you're trying to speak to the group. It's great seeing so many people on the line today. Seems that we're also joined by several Climate Commission members. It's great to have you here, including we've got Dana Stein on the line, and we have Jennifer, I think Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi was planning on being with us. Maybe Beth Harbor as well mentioned that she might be able to jump in. So thank you to the Climate Commissioners who were able to join today. There are many MWG members online, and some may be joining by phone. If you're joining by phone and you're a member, then please do let us know that you're here. To everyone else, thank you for participating in today's meeting. We'll take a few minutes for public comments immediately following the co-chair's opening remarks. The rest of the meeting will be dedicated to allowing the MWG and Commission members to discuss the draft recommendations that are in front of the MWG. If there will be any voting today, then the staff is set up to count votes from the MWG members. If you're a first-time caller and want to see who the MWG members are, then I'll drop a web page in the chat so that you can become acquainted with the membership that's here. Also, quick note at the top here, we're very happy to have Alicia Mulkey, who's appointed to represent the Department of Agriculture on the MWG. So welcome, Alicia, to this group.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. Thank you. Kim and Mike, would you like to make any opening remarks?
Just briefly, and it looks like my camera's not working. I apologize. I don't know why, but
oh, we can see you.
Oh, good. For some reason it doesn't show on my side. We've spent a lot of time talking about incentives for electric vehicles. We've heard presentations on them, but we're coming to the point where we need to make some recommendations this year. What are we going to recommend, if anything? What are the details? So we're going to hear a lot of comments from people, but I do think it's time for us to make some decisions if we're going to be proposing something for this fiscal year.
The only thing I would add to that is a reminder that transportation is the leading source of greenhouse gas emissions for Maryland. So this is the top priority if we're going to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals. So I encourage us to be as big and bold as we possibly can. I've always appreciated and respected each of you on the mitigation work group for how we work together, and I look forward to that continuing through this conversation as well.
Great, thanks so much. And as mentioned, we're going to turn straight to public comments to give members who are not MWG or Commission members the opportunity to weigh in on today's topics of discussion. I believe, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, do we have Mike Johansson here?
Yeah.
Auto?
Yeah, Mike Johansson is here, and I had asked if he represents the dealers, and had earlier than this meeting had expressed some interest in providing a dealer perspective on that. And we, in all of our meetings and considerations of this, we really hadn't heard from dealers. So I asked if he could lead off the public comments for us.
So thank you, Mark, Mike, and Kim. We appreciate your work here. I'm Mike Johansson with the Rifkin firm. I represent both the Maryland Auto Dealers Association as well as the Washington Area New Auto Dealers Association. Peter Kitzmiller is the president of MADA. We were going to take 10, 11 minutes. We're going to be really brief. Peter's going to talk about the incentives. We saw the draft recommendations. We have a few short comments there. And then I want to raise an issue with respect to the transition and getting enough inventory to sell. Peter, can you lead off?
Sure. First of all, thank you all for taking the time to have us. We'll try to be as quick as possible. I did want to start off by saying that the issues and some of the concerns that we raised today, I want to be clear. The Maryland Auto Dealers is not asking the state of Maryland to go backwards. We're not asking them to get out of Clean Cars 2. We're not asking anybody to delay Clean Cars 2. We are too far down the road as far as auto dealers in Maryland are concerned with regards to EVs. My members will spend this calendar year $100 million on infrastructure, chargers, equipment, and training to sell EVs. So this has to work for us. We have got to sell these vehicles. Hopefully, our goal of getting as many EVs on the road as quickly as possible is the state of Maryland's goals and the manufacturer's goals. So I want to be clear. We have some concerns. There are some problems that we'll raise, but we are not asking anyone to go backwards. We're simply trying to make sure that this program works as effectively as possible. Because again, as far as my members are concerned, we've already spent a significant amount of money. We will continue to spend it. We will now have these vehicles in inventory. They've got to sell. We have to get a return on our investment. So just getting to the rebates real quickly, we saw the recommendations. We sent some pretty brief comments. I think we can sort of summarize it very easily. The rebates for EVs need to be at point of sale. The customer needs to get the benefit of the rebate while they're in the showroom. Giving them a form and telling them to fill it out and send it to somebody and waiting to get the money back is significantly less effective than a point of sale rebate. I think that's going to be reflected in the fact that the federal rebate sometime in the first quarter of next year, the $7,500 is going to be transformed into a point of sale rebate. So we think that's critically important. There's got to be some certainty to the rebate. You know, one of the problems that my dealers have is, you know, the last couple of years is we're selling significantly more EVs than we have in the past. The fund runs out earlier and earlier every year. And we're the ones in the crosshairs. We tell, you know, the customer comes back and says, hey, I didn't get my rebate. We've got to make some way to make these rebates more certain. If that's less per car, maybe that's something we can look at. But they've got to be certain and they need to be simple. And I think the proposal, you know, tying it to the federal, you know, requirements makes a lot of sense when you're talking about income and maybe the cap on the price of the vehicle. What I don't think we want to get into is, you know, the federal rebate is very complicated when it comes to where the minerals were mined and where the battery was built and those kind of things. That's, in my opinion, that's more of a federal issue. It's not a state of Maryland issue, but tying, you know, the income requirements and the vehicle and, you know, what the price of the vehicle, what the cap is, that makes a lot of sense to us. The one recommendation about the dealer outreach program, I think is well-intentioned and certainly, you know, but if it's going to be a $6 million cost, I think that money is much better spent, you know, going into the general rebate fund and getting that money to the customers. I think that's going to be much more effective in helping us sell these vehicles is putting the money toward the customer themselves and not maybe, you know, individual salespeople. But, you know, again, I think point of sale is critical. I've heard time and again how Maryland wants to be a leader on this issue. We certainly are not a leader on incentives. You know, if you look at the climate report that it came out from the state of Maryland earlier in the year, we're significantly behind a lot of other states. And I think rebates are going to be a critical piece of this. So I think the more we can, if we have money available, I understand the budget constraints. I know there are limitations, but if we've got some money for some of these other things, I think they're best spent being allocated to the consumer as opposed to maybe spending some money on, you know, dealership personnel. And, you know, I guess lastly is, you know, the 8.25 million is inadequate at this point. You know, it's not enough money. Like I said, it keeps running out earlier and earlier every year. And so I think we need to take a look at how we allocate whatever limited resources we have.
Thanks, Peter. So that's the rebate side. I think the issue that has caused dealers more immediate concern is something that occurred just in June of this year, where one of the manufacturers started to limit gasoline inventory into Maryland dealerships and instead only allow plug-in hybrid versions of Jeep Cherokee and Jeep Wrangler into Maryland dealerships from an inventory perspective. Just to give an example of the impact, in May, 3 dealerships owned by one of the larger dealership groups, Jeep side, received 75 new vehicles in inventory, which they can sell to customers. In July, after the implementation of the policy, they received 11 new vehicles. And those vehicles are all plug-in hybrids with an average price of $10,000 to $12,000 more expensive than their gas comparisons. And I think we all recognize, and even one of your earlier reports mentioned this kind of sales leakage to surrounding states, where Marylanders can go buy vehicles in surrounding states, Pennsylvania and Virginia particularly, and then title them in Maryland. And we don't expect at this point Virginia or Pennsylvania to be on the same timeline with respect to their Clean Car 2 standard, if at all, particularly for model year 27. So as we look to be ready for model year 27, since the manufacturers must meet a delivery mandate, 43% of vehicles they ship to Maryland dealers have to comply with the EV mandate. One way for a manufacturer to meet that ratio is to reduce the number of vehicles that they deliver to Maryland dealers. I'm not suggesting they would do it really for any other reason than if they don't have enough vehicles, EV vehicles, to meet the 43% standard, they're certainly not going to risk the $20-some thousand penalty per vehicle for failure to meet that ratio. So a typical Maryland new car dealer receives 800 new units a year. We sell those to Marylanders, to Virginians, to Pennsylvanians. If for some reason a manufacturer is slow in its EV production, some of these things are outside their control. Some of these things are perhaps because they haven't started soon enough. Whatever the reason, we don't want to be in a situation where a Maryland dealer gets a dramatically reduced number of vehicles, and yet Marylanders can still buy those same gasoline products from Pennsylvania and Virginia. So we've met with many legislators in the governor's office. We aren't asking, because we don't really have an ask at this moment. We don't know how to solve this potential problem. And at the moment, other than Stellantis, it is a potential problem. I think what we're asking this group and MDE and others is to help us kind of brainstorm what to do if we really see that we're on the cusp of this issue. If we notice, for example, the states that have the model year 26 standard, if they start to experience some of this delivery shortage and we think it's going to impact Maryland, we're asking everyone to be vigilant and help us avoid a situation where Maryland businesses are inadvertently affected, and yet Maryland consumers aren't necessarily buying more EVs if there just simply aren't enough of them here. So again, I don't really have an ask for this group. We've been on an awareness campaign at the moment, and we're waiting for the governor's office and some legislators to get back with us on some potential options. So our commitment from the dealer's perspective is to keep a group like this aware of what we're hearing with respect to production. And I would ask if any of the professionals at MDE or others are aware of some potential issues that could affect deliveries to Maryland, and maybe we could share that information. But we appreciate the work that you're doing. If we get them, we'll sell them. The incentives will help that. Our biggest concern is not getting enough inventory to sell it all. So we appreciate you listening to that comment.
Thank you. Your time and comments are much appreciated in this process here today. I see hands up from other public commenters. I'll go in this order: Lindsay, Eric, Jennifer Kuntz, and then Sine. I see hands up also from members of the MWG and the commission, who you all will have the privilege to speak throughout the rest of the meeting. So I'll get to the public comments first, and then we'll open it up for MWG and commission discussion. So going next to Lindsay Mendelson.
Thanks so much, Lindsay Mendelson, Transportation Representative with the Maryland Sierra Club. I'll be really quick because I know there's a lot of hands raised. One thing that I wanted to point out is, at least in the recommendations that are being voted on today that were circulated, I saw that there were no recommendations related to reducing vehicle miles traveled and other policies to invest in transit, cycling, and pedestrian infrastructure. So I strongly encourage the mitigation working group to ensure that there are those recommendations. It would be a glaring omission to have any climate plan recommendations that did not include half of what we need to do related to reducing emissions in the transportation sector. A couple suggestions I have, I understand that there may be hesitancy to put it in there because it hasn't been discussed. There were 4 recommendations last year in the VMT section that I think could be updated and highlighted. The second is that there's already recommendations from other agencies, specifically the Maryland Department of Transportation, that convened stakeholders in the Attainment Report Advisory Committee and set a proposed goal to reduce vehicle miles traveled by 2030. So that specific goal and measures to attain that goal could be put in the recommendations, given that that's been discussed in another agency. And I think it's a joint responsibility to make sure that that happens. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lindsay. Next is Eric.
Good afternoon. Eric Norton. I'm the Director of Policy and Programs with the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance. And yeah, I really just want to also echo Lindsay said, that as Co-Chair Coble said at the beginning, transportation is the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. And there's more and more research coming out that just electrifying the current transportation system we have is not going to be enough to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that we also have to reduce the amount that people are forced to drive every year. And to do that, we're going to have to shift our spending priorities towards public transit, biking, walking, better land use. Transit-oriented development was mentioned in last year's recommendations, as well as spending more of the federal resources the state gets on transit, biking, and walking. And without doing those things, and leaving those sort of like behind from last year and not including them this year, I think that's not the big, bold action that Co-Chair Coble called at the beginning. It's a huge miss, honestly, and we're not going to achieve climate goals just by thinking we can flip a switch and electrify our current system, and that's going to be a panacea for our problems. And so I think it's a big omission to not revisit those recommendations from 2022 and re-up them again. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Coons.
Yes, thank you so much. Hi, I'm Jennifer Kunze with Clean Water Action, and I'm also here to ask the Commission to add a recommendation, which is to clean up the RPS and steer Maryland away overall from polluting industries that have been included in the RPS up until this point. I think many folks are familiar with this issue. It's been a long-standing environmental injustice that things like trash incinerators are being subsidized through the RPS, and the time has long come to fix this problem. It's really urgent if we're going to meet our climate goals. It's been discussed many times that we're behind on, for example, meeting our solar goals. And it doesn't help that we're wasting millions of dollars of RPS money every year just giving free profits to the trash incinerator. These subsidies aren't needed by any means whatsoever. All of the local impacted governments, Baltimore City, Montgomery County, and Frederick County supported the legislation, supported taking trash incineration out of the RPS in this year's legislative session. So that really shows that there's no reason not to take incineration out of the RPS and redirect those funds to wind and solar power where they're actually needed. And then finally, why this is so important is that recent analysis has shown that incineration is the most polluting means of producing electricity per amount of electricity produced. It's more than coal. And locally, analysis has shown that our 2 incinerators in Baltimore and in Montgomery County produce specifically much, much, much more mercury and much more NOx pollution than Maryland's coal plants. And then a newer issue, but no less important, is biogas and biomass, which are currently included in the RPS, but are not very present in Maryland. They share similar environmental justice issues with trash incineration and similar opposition by the communities that would be impacted if those facilities are brought into Maryland. We really cannot afford, with how urgent the climate crisis is, to waste even more money on more facilities that are falsely labeled renewable and are opposed by the local communities and impact climate. So again, please urge the working group to have a recommendation to clean up the renewable portfolio standard and to make sure that these industries, incineration, biogas, and biomass, aren't included in Maryland's future or any future definition that the state might develop for renewable or clean energy. The Commission can really be standing on the right side of environmental justice by incorporating this recommendation. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. The last public comment, because we're running out of time for this, is going to go to Sine Emmanuel. I see other people have raised their hands. I apologize, just that we're running out of time for the public comment section. Sine.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. My name is Sinai. I'm Progressive Maryland's climate policy analyst. Thank you for having me, and thanks for sharing and working on these recommendations. Firstly, I'm really happy to see the tax credit for low-income folks without cars. I'm really hoping there's going to be more, in these recommendations that address environmental justice concerns and impact the lives of the most vulnerable and overburdened. And I also want to echo the concerns regarding RPS that Jennifer just shared and reiterate the urgency to address it. So my colleague, Sir James, has been talking with hundreds of residents in Baltimore neighborhoods, including Cherry Hill and Westport, and they're deeply concerned about environmental injustice in their community. And according to EPA data and Baltimore Emissions Inventory Report, the Bresco Baltimore incinerator creates the equivalent emissions in a year as around 145,000 cars and is the single largest stationary source of emissions in the city. Tall, iconic smokestack is radiating toxic chemicals like lead and mercury, and the exposure to this pollution worsens and triggers upper respiratory health issues, which is not great in a city already struggling with disproportionately high asthma rates. So exposure to this mercury and lead radiating from the incinerator can damage immune, digestive, and nervous systems, and lungs and kidneys. The thing is, there are ways to achieve desired emissions reductions without continuing with the same old toxic systems that are unfortunately actively harming people at disproportionate rates. So cleaner, more sustainable alternatives exist, right? So for example, local community organizations are doing great work to expand zero waste initiatives like community composting and recycling while developing youth leadership and meaningful job opportunities. And so funding and supporting these initiatives should be prioritized because they're not only addressing the emission mitigation component, but also developing and investing in local communities. And at the end of the day, communities across Maryland want the state to transition away from incineration so they can clean, breather air and have healthier lives. And we have to, not continue to poison people. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those public comments. We're going to turn now to a conversation for the MWG members and participating commission members on reviewing, revising, and voting on recommendations, if we get to voting today. So the staff edited some of the discussion draft recommendations based on the MWG's discussion during its last meeting. Those recommendations were sent out to you in the draft earlier this week. I'll also be screen sharing today so that we can all be looking at them on the screen. We also added recommendations that we received from co-chair Kim Coble and MWG members Elizabeth Bunn and Tom Ballantyne. I don't know that we're going to get that far down the list today. I have a feeling that we'll spend most of our time probably on recommendation number 1 alone, but we'll see how far we can get. If you haven't already seen the recommendations, I will also put them in the chat so that you could follow along on your own screen. But again, I will be screen sharing here. Just a quick note, we've also received additional recommendations from MWG members Brian Magali and Garrett Fitzgerald. The co-chairs are going to review those recommendations to see if they address the MWG's priorities for this year, and if they do, we'll be circulating those out to the members in the coming weeks. All right, with that said, let me go ahead and screen share and put to the recommendations up on the screen so that we can all be looking at the same thing. All right. So the first recommendation is a complicated one because what we've done, for better or worse, is stack together or show how several of the discussion draft recommendations can stack together and interact with the federal clean vehicle credit. So the first part of the draft recommendation that you see is for reference only, right? The federal clean vehicle credit, we just wanted to make sure that you all had visibility into what are the income limits used for the federal program, what are the price limits, and also the fact that for on the federal side, for new EVs, that tax credit is available to individuals, businesses, and tax-exempt organizations. To the best of our understanding, the used EV incentive is available only to individuals and not businesses and organizations. So the idea here, first, right off the bat, was that the state's base incentive available for most car buyers would really just be a match on the federal program. So the proposal is a $2,500 point of sale rebate that if you qualify for the federal incentive, you meet the income limits. It's a vehicle that has a price below the federally mandated price caps, then you would also qualify for the state incentive. So it's just stacking right on top. The other two programs are proposed kind of bonuses on top of that. So you would think of the low to moderate income, or the LMI bonus, being additional funding from the state, again, a point of sale rebate that would stack on top of the Maryland Clean Vehicle Credit, right? So in the case of a new vehicle, if you're a low to moderate income person, and that means that you are your income limit is up to 80% of area median income, which in Maryland on average is about $90,000 per year for a household of 4. So your household income would need to be below $90,000 a year for a household of 4 in Maryland. You would qualify for a $5,000 additional bonus on top of the $2,500 base rebate. So that's $7,500 total. And if you have the tax liability to qualify for the federal incentive, which is, it's a non-refundable tax credit, so you need to have enough tax liability to take advantage of it, then that would provide up to $15,000 for a new vehicle. Very important caveat: if your income is too low and you don't have enough federal tax liability, then you would not be eligible to receive the full $7,500 federal tax credit. So that's why I say it's up to $15,000. And then copy everything I just said and transfer it over to the used vehicle side. The used vehicle side, the federal credit is up to $4,000. The base credit in Maryland would be a $1,000 credit point of sale rebate for a used vehicle, again using the same federal limits, which in this case goes down to a maximum income of $150,000 for a married couple filing jointly, a vehicle price of no greater than $25,000. And then the LMI bonus, if you're at or below 80% of area median income, there's an additional $3,000 bonus to bring the total federal plus state plus bonus to up to an $8,000 incentive to help you purchase a used vehicle if you're LMI. Let me pause there because I imagine that just those two proposed programs are enough to get some conversation going. And we can park for now the idea of the super user bonus.
Yeah, Mark, just for background, can you remind people what the existing Maryland incentive programs are?
Sure. So currently, if you purchase an electric vehicle in Maryland, and in this case, I'm talking about a 4-wheel standard electric vehicle, that's a $3,000 credit that you can get. It's not a point of sale rebate. You have to apply for it, and then you get, some weeks later, that $3,000 returned to you from the state, from MVA. It's a Maryland Vehicle Administration Program, administered program. The price cap, there's no income limit on that, but the price cap is $50,000. So the base price of the vehicle needs to be $50,000 or less to get that $3,000 credit. No income limit, and it's funded for this fiscal year to the tune of I think $8.25 million. Let's see. I see a hand up from Jennifer. Go ahead, please.
Jennifer, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this great proposal, and I particularly am interested in hearing from the car dealers on this point. The polling overall shows substantially that are barriers to moving out more EVs are, number one, that there is a range anxiety and a fear of lack of charging stations. And secondly, that they're not aware, the public is not aware of existing incentives from the federal government. So I'm concerned that this is hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money going to essentially people who are already going to buy a car. And I'm wondering if maybe in the first year we need to focus more on letting people know what the incentives are from the federal government and really pushing hard on getting more charging stations up, especially given that right now the inventory of affordable EVs, both new and used, is so very, very limited, but we're expected in a couple of years to have a much larger inventory of things that could be within the reach of the low and moderate income individuals. So I wonder if we could hear from either the people who did the study that we saw or the dealers what their thoughts are on those particular points.
Is Peter still on?
Yes, I'm still on. So I would say a couple of things. I think your point with regards to, and actually we are doing a poll, hopefully we have by the end of the month for consumers about what is their biggest concern. I think you're correct. I think the biggest concern initially on getting to people consider EVs is range anxiety / charging infrastructure. I think that is correct. We're going to try to quantify that and get people to list what their concerns are. I think number one, with regards to range anxiety, that is something that we can overcome as car. We're the ones that have to sell these vehicles. We now have products which we haven't had. We've only had for about 6 or 8 months or a year now, that actually have range which are sufficient for almost every consumer we deal with. The problem is we've got to get them in or get them to consider it. Once we can sit them down and explain to them how it works, and hey, you got 280 miles and you're only going to be driving 50, I think we can overcome that. But you're right, we have to figure out a way to get them into the dealership so we can explain that to them. I think secondly, the charging infrastructure is critical, and the state needs to have a charging infrastructure. But at the end of the day, we have no chance of selling somebody an EV unless they can charge the vehicle at home. And I know that one of the recommendations you all have, and we supported a bill last year that the manufacturers put in about requiring new construction on multifamily housing to have, the ability to put in level 2 charging. We've got to have that. We can't, if we eliminate 50% of our customer base that lives in multifamily housing and they can't charge those vehicles easily at home, we have no chance of getting to these 43% sales mandate the first year out. We just don't. We have to be able to convince customers that the car has a sufficient range, which they do now, and you're going to be able to charge them at home. And if you put those two things together, your range anxiety is going to go way down, because it's going to, on your daily, let's leave trips out of it, but your daily use of your vehicle is going to be taken care of. The incentives, again, I think, from a dealer perspective, we had a board meeting on Tuesday, and we've had, a number of vehicles to sell now for about a year. And if you're talking to my dealers, we've hit the first round of people, and Tesla hit most of them. the early adopters that wanted an EV no matter what, they've bought them. Now we're dealing with people who we have to convince to buy an EV because it's better for the environment, it's better for them, they drive better, which a lot of things that they do, but we've got to get them to consider an EV, and that's where I think incentives are important. So there's other things we can do too, but incentives are going to be what helps get people to, hey, I'm going to at least consider an EV because I can get $10,000 between the state of Maryland, and the federal government. I'll at least get down and sit down and talk to the dealer to see whether this vehicle works for me or not.
Ian, could you comment on the charge from home and MEA study on multifamilies? Because I know the law already requires it now for new single family homes, but can you talk about where the state is on that issue?
Well, sure. As you know, there was a bill. Obviously, this came up in the legislature last year, and there was legislation on this issue. And one of the things that it did is asked MEA to do a study on the availability of chargers at multifamily, homes, apartments, whatever. And that study, we're in the process of conducting. We have a consultant on staff. And there'll be an RFI shortly to provide some public feedback. And our intention and goal is to have that before the end of the year. I don't think we'll have it, in time for this group to vote or for the full commission necessarily, but hopefully before the next session.
Thank you. I see a hand up from Jamal Lewis.
Yeah, I have a couple questions that I think are like jumbled up together, but I think along the lines of the structure, how much incentives for buying new cars sort of is the right amount? And so I guess one question is, I think it was mentioned that the consistency of rebates is helpful. And so like what do you mean by consistency? Like, does that mean sort of the current structure that's being proposed, which is a certain budget amount per year, or does that mean something else? I wonder if the current structure that's being proposed, which is a certain budget amount per year, if that is the right structure also, versus a total amount that can be used over multiple years. And then like sort of tied in with that, I told you sort of a bunch of different questions that are all related. Currently, when the amount of rebates is exhausted for the year, does that significantly reduce the number of cars that are purchased? And if so, is there data to support that? So those are my thoughts and questions.
That's a great questions. I don't have an answer to the last question that you posed regarding, we've definitely heard that consistency around the availability of these funds is important, that consumers don't want to, have to run out at the beginning of a fiscal year and then late in the fiscal year be told that there's nothing left. So the budget estimates that we've put together assume that there's that practically everyone who could qualify for a rebate would receive a rebate. So that's why you're seeing fairly high costs, right? We're estimating about $300 million a year starting next fiscal year if the state were to provide that $2,500 incentive for everyone who would qualify. Now, note, Delaware and other states are offering exactly this: $2,500 for a new vehicle, $1,000, I think, for a used EV, but they've only put a few $1 million into it. So it's the sort of situation that and Maryland has been here in the past in terms of having EV incentive programs that didn't have quite enough money to meet demand.
I think, Mark, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if we got somebody from Energetics on. I think I recall them commenting that running out of money could make an incentive sort of a disincentive, because word gets around that it's the rebate is not real in a sense. And so you might actually, running out of money, have a negative impact. At least I think I remember them saying that.
Yeah, fortunately, Russ Owens from Energetics is able to join us today. So, Russ, do you have a comment on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think actually that was part of VIC, and Dave Roberts is on the line if I to add anything. But yeah, that right there was the guidance. Essentially stop start incentives disincentivize people, because if they don't get there in time, or if they learn about it late, then they learn they didn't get their rebate. Now they're heartbroken. And having a lower level incentive consistently was a better plan.
So that would seem to suggest that an allocation every year wouldn't be as effective as having maybe a larger allocation that is available over multiple years.
I guess the challenge we run into is that we're already talking a significant allocation. So if the intent were to fund it for multiple years in one lump sum, that could be a $1 billion proposal for a single fiscal year, which just creates budgeting challenges for the state, of course.
Yeah, understood.
If there are no other hands, I can tell you where I come out on this for what it's worth. I think that certainty is the key here. And though I think the bigger the incentive, the more we get, I'm more concerned with keeping it simple so that the incentive is at the point of sale, that anybody who qualifies for the federal rebate gets the whatever state base rebate. We may do LMI or super user above it, I don't know, but the base rebate, so that when it's advertised, it can be advertised as, instead of 7,500, maybe it's 8,500. And if we have to cut or if the General Assembly has to cut the amount we recommended for understandable budget reasons, that they cut the amount of the rebate while preserving the point of sale and the tying to the existing federal system for simplicity. Because I think incentives only work when it's clear and can be advertised by those who are trying to sell the vehicles.
Okay, so we've got the beginning of a sensible amendment to basically add notation to this around when budget constraints hit, the preference would be to provide a base rebate of a lower amount to all qualified purchasers rather than provide a higher level to only the first consumers that are stepping forward to take advantage of it. Okay. So let's take some conversation, some discussion around that idea right there. So if we're focusing now on I think primarily the base incentive, the Maryland Clean Vehicle Credit proposed. But by the way, there's nothing magic about that name. That's the name of convenience, because there's the federal Clean Vehicle Credit, and this is just a state program that would stack up right on it. Hence the really simple name. Let's see, Garrett, go ahead.
My comment is just that I completely agree with Mike that those two principles should be front and center. And if we need to compromise on the amount, we need to compromise on the amount. But certainty and making sure that it's available right at the time of sale, I think are the two things that matter most here. Thanks.
Thank you. Brian?
Sorry there. Muting issues. Yeah, I would agree with both the comments, sets of comments we've just heard. But I think I would even take it one step further, in that it seems to me that the federal credits are really what are doing the heavy lifting here, budgetarily, budget wise, and in terms of making the biggest dent in the sale price of a vehicle, and are likely to be the incentive that brings customers to the showrooms to look at these vehicles. I think the Maryland credit, should be, again, based on the points that we had just heard, it should be very, very clear and straightforward, and perhaps even available to everyone. at a lower value to be used as sort of a bonus rather than something that we expect to be the thing that makes the entire sale possible. I think the simplicity will be a very welcome change, I think, for customers looking to avail themselves of these types of incentives. I think that removing any qualifications entirely will make it much simpler to administer. And if it's at a significantly lower value, it will still matter and may at the same time not be a budget buster insofar as it's available to everyone. I don't have a specific value or number in mind. It could be something $500, something along those lines. We would have to, I think, run the numbers to see if it would be possible to fund. But again, I just think that really making it as simple and straightforward as possible and removing any requirements entirely will likely have the best effect in terms of, encouraging buyers to look at these vehicles as something that they want to do and want to purchase, and also improve the experience of actually doing so. And then it's something that they'll talk about to other friends and neighbors and colleagues and other people that they know about how wonderful and easy this all was, and they should go check it out themselves. So,
okay. Thank you. Jennifer?
Thank you. If we're going to do a $300 million incentive, I think we need to commit 2% of that amount of money, $6 million, to have a sophisticated, trusted messenger campaign to educate and advocate, where people know about the federal and the state subsidies and incentives, because this is a tree falling in the forest where nobody's hearing it. People do not know these things exist, and we've got to drive people to the point of purchase.
And thank you for that. For everyone's awareness, I understand that the Education, Communications, and Outreach Working Group is working on a recommendation around an educational campaign that might be going to the commission next month or so. Kim?
Yes, a couple thoughts. One is the title. I would suggest we don't use the word credit, that we use the word rebate, because somebody could read that and think it's a tax credit really easily. Minor point. In terms of the proposal that it's hand, I agree with the direction that this is going, and I particularly agree with Brian that I think the $7,500 federal is incentive enough to get people really seriously thinking about an electric car. And that what we may want to do is try to focus some of that money beyond those that are, or to those that are not eligible for the $7,500. And so what about a lesser amount, but broadly applied at the point of sale? And when you look at the current program, the cutoff for a price of a car is $50,000. And well, that's a lot of money. The price of these cars are just going up and up and up. And there's a lot on the market that are above 50,000. And yeah, so I'm just trying to think about people that, other people that are not eligible for the 7,500. How can we get them on board? My last comment is I completely agree with Jennifer that, a public education campaign has got to go hand in glove with this. That's a no-brainer.
And
can I just ask one clarification about your proposal, Kim? I think there's three things that would make somebody not qualify for the federal. One would be an income level, two would be the cost of the vehicle, and three would be where the batteries originated. Are you proposing broadening all three of those, or one or two of those? I'm just trying to understand the concept.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd originally was thinking of the price of the car. So that one, yes. The other two,
I know
I have to think about, but maybe we can.
I know the dealers would like to see it broadened to all EVs, not merely those that are manufactured in the U.S.
Right.
I'm not advocating myself here, but that's a request they made.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm going to agree with that.
Yeah, and there's building on that, of course, with those income limits, there are issues on both sides. Well, I don't want to say that it's an issue that if you have if you're married filing jointly and you have a joint income over $300,000 and you don't qualify, I'm not saying that's an issue, but there's the upper limit, and then there's also if you're a lower income, low to moderate income buyer, you might not have the federal tax liability to take advantage of 7,500 credit. So there's really only a band of people, and those are up to those max limits, but at a floor that is quite high, really, to get that full $7,500. So there's a hefty chunk of LMI population that can't benefit from that full $7,500 federal non-refundable tax credit. Let's see, Elizabeth Bunn.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and thanks everyone for all your comments. Really good discussion so far. I have one question and then a couple comments, and I'll just do the question first. And that is, and this would apply both to federal and the state, just for clarification, if someone leases their car, which I think a lot of people do, just because it's sort of uncertain where the technology is going, which of these, if any, incentives apply? So that's one question. My comments are totally agree with the several speakers who have emphasized the importance of certainty. Also agree with the many speakers who have talked about the point of sale rebate being critical to this being an effective tactic to get people to adopt and make the transition. In terms of the, I do think that the budget price that we're talking about, the budget amount is a lot. Can't deny that. But so are the consequences, the dire consequences of climate change. So I think a couple things having to do with the budget. One is doing it year by year, I think, is the best approach, even if we could budget-wise do it for longer. And the reason I say that is, as sales go up, presumably, the theory is that prices will start to come down. Now, there's some countervailing winds on this, including, the manufacturers jacking up prices because of the incentives. But nonetheless, in general, I think we'll see prices coming down, and we may not need those incentives. On the question of, and the other thing is, I think we have to be mindful of budgetary constraints, but I think our primary goal is making recommendations that we believe will mitigate climate change. And so I think let other people worry about that. I don't mean we should just be, profligate about it, but I think we really need to be laser focused on what we need to do to get EVs on the road. And then the final thing on the question of manufacturing location, I strongly, strongly, strongly urge us to maintain the federal standards having to do with U.S. manufacturing. That Inflation Reduction Act in my lifetime is the first time we've really approached anything involving an industrial policy in this country. And there are many, many union folks and non-union folks who are very pleased with the incentives for domestic manufacturing, and it's worked. There's a lot of studies about plants that are opening around the country, including in disadvantaged communities, as a consequence of those requirements. So I think us going against that would be a very, very bad message and a big mistake. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and very timely comments considering the focus on Capitol Hill today around these issues. Delegate Stein, go ahead, Mike.
I just could answer Liz's question about leasing if you want.
Oh, that's right. Thanks. I thought you might.
The EV federal incentives are only available to the buyer of a car, not to a lessee. However, there is a potential loophole. The person who buys the car and leases it out, or the company that buys the car and leases it out, can get the credit and can choose to pass it on to the lease is not required to. So it's not directly available to a lessee. A company that buys them and leases them out could choose to give the customer a benefit.
And that is being done currently.
Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Stein, thanks for joining us today.
Sure, thank you. I guess I have to disagree with the last comment and agree with Kim's suggestion that the rebate be available to a buyer of any EV. As much as I support domestic production, I think it's more important that we here in Maryland incentivize as many EV purchases as possible. And right now, at least to me, it is confusing to customers. You have to go online. You have to find the list of what types of EVs have been deemed acceptable for the federal rebate, whereas current Maryland policy says, well, I mean, there is the price cap, which I would, $50,000, which I would say should go up. But aside from that, there's no eligibility, there's no restriction on the type of car. So, which I think is the better policy. So I would second what Kim is proposing.
Thank you very much, Delegate Stein. Let's see, Jamal, and then going back to Kim.
Yeah, this is a clarifying question. So the federal credit says it can be point of sale starting in 2024, and I'm not understanding what would prevent it from becoming a point of sale, and clarifying that there is no, like, it is intended to be a tax credit, so there is no like finite amount of money, right? Like this is available through the end of its authorization period. Those are my two questions.
Yeah,
I think the distinction is between the federal and state, because the feds print their own money. They don't have to appropriate a sum of money. They can just say everybody who comes in gets this, and they'll find the money some way. The state appropriates a pot of money, and when that pot of money runs out, then the rebate or credit runs out.
And
so it sounds like is that for the federal credit, even if it becomes a rebate, it is still like there is still going to be money there through the end of its authorization period, effectively.
Yes, I think what happens is that in 2024, individuals, when buying a car, can basically transfer their tax credit to the dealer, who can then offer that as a point of sale rebate. But it's still, and I think that the final guidance on this is due out from the IRS later this year. So, don't take any of this to the bank or to your car dealer. But the best of our understanding is that that it can turn into a point of sale rebate, but it's still really the individual's tax credit that is transferred to the dealer, who can then offer it as a point of sale rebate, which means if you're an LMI customer and you don't have the tax liability based on your previous year's tax return, then it doesn't create, as far as we understand, a loophole for that LMI customer to get the full 7,500
until 2024, where pending the rules.
No, even in 2024 and through 2032, I think that the credit is still based on that person's federal tax liability. It's just that in 2024, you create the opportunity to transfer your tax credit to the dealer, who can offer it then as a point of sale rebate, so you don't have to wait to receive your tax credit later.
Okay, I'm gonna dive into that, but that is, I think that is at least for me, having clarification around that is helpful, because thinking about like the consistency of the incentive, I agree with what's been said previously, where that's a pretty significant amount of incentive. And so if that in itself is consistent, then the state's incentives and targeted incentives can help to fill or can help to enhance, that incentive. So that to me is really important.
Yeah, and for everyone's benefit, in previous discussions, I think it was safe to say that there was pretty strong support, certainly support from the consultants who did this study, and support from the MWG around the value of having this additional support for LMI customers. If I would say a very brief summary of some of the discussion around the last meeting was, some more question about this idea of providing a base rebate for higher income customers up to the federal income limits for the federal incentive. Let's see, Kim, going back to you.
Yeah, I remember a conversation we had about these rebate programs where we had discussed the possibility of distributing it throughout the year, the allocations, which I know could get complicated from the state end, but I'm more, so we talked about some geographic distribution, and what I'm wondering about is temporal distribution of those eligibility of those funds, so that it's not just the first people in January, February, and March that get access to it. So did that get, and I can't find it in the list. I thought that was part of the recommendation somewhere. I'm remembering incorrectly.
So we heard that specifically regarding the MWG's discussion around the Fleet Electrification Technical Assistance Program. So one of the parts that we added in here is that the program administrator should allocate grants in each geographic region of the state, give preference to small businesses based in Maryland, and promote the super user bonus. Well, that one someone decide, but what we were hearing, and tell us if we got this wrong, was that geographic distribution had more to do with making sure that fleet owners located statewide could benefit, and it wasn't just if we had owners in one part of the state, they wouldn't run and take advantage of all the funds.
My memory was that Garrett was the one who suggested that from a MACO standpoint. Is that right, Garrett, about geographic distribution?
Yeah, just wanted to make sure that folks like here in Montgomery County don't use up all the incentive before it's possible for folks, and I think the issues that were raised earlier around just education and communication around the availability of the incentives, there might need to be some effort to make sure that everyone knows that this is possible, and certain parts of the state might have more folks that are kind of more ready already looking for these vehicles, et cetera. We want to really drive more folks to EVs who might not have gone there already. So making sure that there's an opportunity for folks in different parts of the state to take advantage of this incentive, I think, is important.
Jamal, I see your hand up. I'm not sure if that was from the last time or if you have another comment.
Sorry.
All right, so either to the co-chairs or to the members, it sounds like good ideas about potentially modifying this, or at least adding some notes for the General Assembly, essentially, in this recommendation that I guess going back to Mike's comment some time ago, you could look at this $2,500 and $1,000 point of sale rebate as being a ceiling rebate, based on budget availability. But when fiscal constraints arise, the recommendation would be reduce the rebate, but still allow every Maryland consumer who's purchasing an EV to have some benefit from this program. I don't know if we exactly landed, or if I quite heard consensus on whether or not that should be eligible for all purchasers versus purchasers who meet those federal income limits versus some other income eligibility.
Do you want it in the form of a motion, Mark, or?
It would probably be helpful.
I don't want to interrupt Garrett. I can make a motion, but I don't want to interrupt his comment because he had his hand up.
All right, well, we go to Garrett then.
The thing I was just thinking about here with the it sounds like it would be very useful to any legislator that might want to take up this idea and do something with it, if we were able to make any kind of prediction about if depending, maybe we can present, here are a few different options for incentive levels. So we're talking here about this $2,500 number, kind of out of thin air. I mean, I'm sure that some analysis has been done, but if it was 500, if it was 1,000, if it's 2,500, is it possible for the consultants that did some of this analysis for us to estimate what the budget, what the likely uptake of each of those different incentive levels could be if we offered a few options with a corresponding total budget impact to the state, so that if the legislator is thinking about these options, they can, if they want to make sure that certainty is there and we're not going to run out, what would the dollar number be where you're kind of balancing that the impact it has on more purchases and the amount we're going to have to spend? Like, what's that sweet spot? And I'm just wondering out loud if the consultants who did the analysis for us might feel like they can help predict where that number maybe could go to accomplish certainty, so that it's not up to the legislator later to guess at that, but we might be able to help them make an educated guess.
Well, I think the consultants have reached the end of their funding on this project, but should the General Assembly want input from MDE, we have the capability of doing some of that calculation, because again, what we assume based on ACC2 sales targets, the total number of Marylanders who will be buying EVs into the future. If we also assume that everyone, at least under some income limit, would receive a point of sale rebate, then the math is actually pretty easy, because that then becomes a rebate that is applied to every sale of the EV, right? It becomes challenging when you say, if you offered this sort of thing that people need to apply to, how many people would apply? But I think with the point of sale rebate, and this is part of the reason why the cost is so high, frankly, is that we're assuming that every purchaser who qualifies will basically automatically get that point of sale rebate.
I think Ian has a hand up.
Yeah, Ian.
Yeah, I guess so. The point of these incentives, right, is to get people into EVs sooner. I mean, on our current trajectory, everybody eventually is going to get an EV, because that's basically what the law essentially is going to require, because that's what that's what manufacturers are going to be allowed to sell in the state. So, we want to jumpstart the EV sooner, because we're going to get those reductions sooner, which is what we need in order to hit our climate goals. So that's like the big picture, right? When we start giving rebates to basically everybody, we're going to get a certain level of free ridership too. We know that. We want it. So I think, but these costs are, pretty mind blowing actually. Looking at it from I was never worked in the budget committee, but I have that context. I know there's a lot of needs just within the climate plan. There's a lot of needs, let alone the rest of state operations and budget. So I think we have to try to be as efficient as possible, try to reduce that free ridership while being, keeping a fairly simple application of what we're trying to do, and try to get those greenhouse gas emissions down from transportation. And I think if the incentive is too low, we're probably not going to drive a lot of sales. It becomes like marketing, sort of, we have this at MEA with our programs too. It doesn't become almost just like a coupon. Maybe that has value, not to actually convert the sale, but to say, look, Maryland is behind the EV transition, and we're going and we're putting some funding in to boost that federal rebate, so that we're in alignment with federal policy. So even though it's not the financial transaction, we're not necessarily moving the needle that much, but we're getting them in the door. So I guess that's the sort of question I'm asking. At what level? And we don't have. I know this is not a science. I understand that. There's a little bit of intuition here, right? And legislators will exercise their own judgment, also, and of course the full commission. But to try to figure out, are we trying to really convert the sale from a gas vehicle to an EV, or is it more like just consider the EV, and once you do that, hopefully the rest of the the incentives will sort of be there for you? So I guess that's sort of the question that I'm confronting and facing here, because I do think that the total cost here is probably unrealistic and unreasonable.
I mean, I'll give you my thought in trying to frame a motion. I look at all those advertisements for cars, and you see people saying $500 back on purchase, and it gets people in the dealership. Okay, so that's whatever it is. I think it might attract them. I really don't believe the legislature is going to do, 300 million in 25 and 26 and 365 and 27. The way I was going to frame the motion was to some extent leave it to them to how much their budget concerns will get. But I'm trying in my mind to frame a motion to reflect what I hear the majority here saying. I may miss that, but I'm willing to take a stab at it. Let me try that. And again, I'm putting it out there for discussion, I guess. I would suggest that the mitigation working group recommend that the state adopt a clean vehicle rebate program using the same eligibility of people that the federal, so anyone who qualifies for the federal rebate would qualify for the state rebate, but that, as suggested by Delegate Stein, all EVs qualify, that it be at the point of sale and in an amount not to exceed $2,500 for new vehicles and $1,000 for used vehicles. I think I've tried to capture the majority of the comments. I don't think all the comments have supported this, but that's my try at it anyway.
Okay, so we'll have discussion on the motion to, and of course, there's some wordsmithing that's needed, and I'll reflect a final draft back to the MWG after the meeting. But the screen's jumping around. The motion is to basically amend this section, this part, to the state should adopt a clean vehicle rebate program using the same federal income limits. All EVs would qualify. It would be a point of sale rebate, and the rebate would not exceed $2,500 for new EVs and $1,000 for used EVs. So discussion on that motion. Hearing, okay, Ian?
Just one question. Is there a reason why we don't want to have some sort of cap on the vehicle price? I mean, that's a fairly straightforward limit. I know we don't want to make it overly complex, but at some point, I'm not sure that the Maryland incentive is really going to be driving the sale on a $80,000 Tesla or whatever we're talking about, and other vehicles. So I guess I would just raise that question to allow a certain amount of targeting.
Do you have a number in mind?
I'm personally comfortable with the current limit. I know that there is some desire I've heard from Kim and Dana and others to raise it. I'm not, but I do think that maybe a cap, just to have a little bit more focus to, like I was saying, to reduce the free ridership a little bit. I understand there's going to be some, and I'm fine with that. But I think that we can bring, constrict it.
My thought on that is that it's almost a self-correcting system, because when if you're buying an $80,000 car, the likelihood that you're not going to qualify is pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm gravitating to one of the other goals that we have, which is simplify this program. Just, so we don't have so many checks and balances that it just becomes unwieldy for the state. So, I get the point, but I think the income requirement kind of takes care of that.
That's fine.
Brian?
Yeah, I mean, just on this vehicle price cap. I mean, the average cost of a new passenger vehicle is approaching $50,000 across the board. So, I mean, we're talking about this is what vehicles cost these days. And I like Kim's point that there is this self-correcting mechanism if we're going to include the income limitations that are included in the federal program. I just had a question on the wording that Michael offered. The do not to exceed $2,500. Wording it that way, is it meant to suggest that the legislature, governor, whoever we're passing this along to, should not consider going above that level, but it's worth looking at values that are lower? Is that okay? Good.
Yeah, just from a budget standpoint. I mean, I can't sit here and say how much money they can afford to put on this because it's all the other demands on their time. But we can say that 2,500 would clearly be sufficient, and if they can't make it 2,500, then they pick the number.
Good, thanks.
Tim Shepard, thanks for joining.
Sure. This is just a kind of clarification since we're talking about the price cap. If we were submitting this, I think one change that could be recommended also under the existing thing, it says a base price. So it's very easy to have a vehicle like, I'll say a Tesla Model Y with a base price of 47. And if you just add a couple options, you're up to $62,000. So perhaps instead of just base price, it should be, and this would be something maybe Peter or Mike can answer, like transaction price or something like that, because Tesla doesn't price their things as far as like different categories. It's the Model S, and then you just add options. So that base price is one level, but by the time that person could be done optioning it, it could be 60-some thousand. And on a reverse, some dealers might have a $52,000 car and they're offering a $5,000 dealer rebate. So that car is actually going to have a transaction price of 47, but it might have a base price of 52, depending on how you're looking at it. So again, I think I would kick that over to the dealers as a way to word that. But I think just something to be wary of when we make the recommendations about the price cap.
Thanks for that. I see a hand up from Jana.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Kim and Ian's conversation, and it might be that it's simpler to just keep it exactly matching the federal program, and that it would be less conversation in the legislature next year if it's like, look, it's just matching the federal program. We're not, someone else has thought of this all the way through. We're not going to weigh in on whether there's a different income cap or a different, costly vehicle cap, and it might just be more simple to keep it that way. I was also trying to figure out how to incorporate some of the targeting. Some folks in the chat made the point that if we target this to the users who would have the biggest change by switching over, i.e. someone not coming from a different EV to a new EV. Now I'm like going against my original comment, which is let's just keep it simple and make it exactly the federal, but maybe the targeting can be accomplished with marketing, as someone said in the chat. And then my third point was just throwing it out there. You can only qualify if you either have an ag tag or a bay plate. What do you think about that? Just an idea.
I somehow
I had to say it.
I knew you were going to throw that in there. And yes, get your customized plates in Maryland. They're awesome. To build on something you just mentioned there, we're seeing more states come forward with linking incentives with trade-in requirements. You need to trade in or scrap an old gas-powered vehicle in order to get the EV incentive. So that somewhat addresses your point about targeting it. Let's see, Elizabeth and then Chris.
Yes, sorry to beat probably a horse that, if not dead, is dying. But again, I think it would be really a big mistake for us to have all the vehicles. That, again, the Inflation Reduction Act was intended to, and in fact has demonstrated to, encourage domestic manufacturing. and for Maryland to take the opposite tack and incentivize, no matter where a car is built or where its component parts are built, what the labor standards are. I think that is going in the wrong direction, and I really hope that people reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
On the income limits, purchase price limits, I think it's important for us to target this in that way for the reasons we've described. But just in terms of practicality, if it's a point of sale rebate, how do income limits play out? When you're in a dealer talking to a salesperson, how do we turn that into point of sale if you need to demonstrate your income?
It would be the same way that the feds do, right? That this, and starting in 2024, it'll be a point of sale rebate for the feds, and so they'll still have to qualify the income as well.
So then they haven't issued that guidance yet, but do we know how that works? Do you bring your 1040?
Whatever the
does
guidance
the dealer get that from the credit check?
Whatever the guidance requires is what I have in mind with the motion is if you meet the federal guidance, then you meet the state guidance. Because I'm exactly concerned about what I think you're raising, which is I don't want the dealers trying to do a tax audit in order to decide whether you qualify. So whatever guidance the feds issue, whoever their test is defined, I would suggest that state do the same.
Well, we should definitely learn from that, because there is also, if people find out, after an hour in the dealership that, oh, I was supposed to bring income documentation and show it to this stranger, and that might be my tax return, then, using the vehicle purchase price is definitely a coarser way to get at this issue, but it is something that is known at the time already. So there is an administrative benefit to using that as the variable instead of income.
Yeah, the only reason I didn't suggest it that way is the federal incentives are so big anyway that anybody who's buying the car because of the incentives is already going to be jumping through the hoops, whatever hoops the guidance has, right? It's one thing to say, do I have to bring in my tax return in order to get a $500 state rebate? It's another to say, well, by bringing in my tax return, I get a $7,500 tax rebate. So I'm assuming that the dealers, when they get point of sale rebates, are going to make it very clear to people what they need to bring with them. We don't know what that is because the guidance hasn't been issued yet.
Go ahead, Kim.
I don't know how I feel about this, but the other possibility is to recommend a lesser amount, $1,000 for a new one, and have no requirements, right? Like no income, and it's just a sweetener. And I don't know, maybe we do it for a few years and see how it goes. But I hadn't thought about your point, Chris, so I don't have a great idea for a solution.
See a hand up from Brian.
Yeah, Kim, and that was really what I was getting at earlier. Just it's something, I think Michael might have said it, $500 rebate, offered, mentioned in a vehicle advertisement, it would get people in the door. But the underlying decision to do the deal in the first place was likely going to be motivated by the federal incentive. So if this is something that adds a little excitement, then maybe it's worth looking into.
And I guess I should add, I assume that the Biden administration is going to make this as easy as possible when they issue that guidance. Right? They clearly haven't shown any desire to give out fewer of these rebates. So I'm just, that's an assumption on my part, but I assume they're going to make this as easy as possible.
Yeah, Kim.
Well, as long as we're going for it, the other thing we could potentially put in here is a recommendation around a funding source, which we haven't really discussed, but maybe there's an increase in registration fees on gas-powered cars, And that fee goes to help offset some of this stuff, which I know is a new topic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'm opposed to the idea. I might have suggest to you that it be a separate motion, just because I'm trying to reach a consensus on this one, right? And I might vote for that, by the way. But I'm just suggesting maybe would you consider that as a separate motion rather than an amendment to this one?
Yes, happy to. Yeah. So yeah.
Got it. Okay, I will put a pin in that and note it. I guess is there additional conversation on the motion that Mike made, which is roughly represented in the comment on your screen? And I think that most of what we were just discussing there was whether or not there is a desire to change the idea that the income limits be the same as the federal income limits, or for the state program, remove income limits, which would mean that all EVs qualify. It would be a point of sale rebate not to exceed $2,500 for a new vehicle and $1,000 for a used EV, but no income requirements.
I tend to, since it's my motion, to keep the federal income limits, because it just takes one example of somebody buying an electric Porsche and suddenly the bad press kills the program. And I think you're right. The number of people who could buy an electric Porsche and meet the income levels are very, very, very small. But I don't want to take the chance that, somebody finds a loophole and it kills the program. That just would be my suggestion.
I agree with you, Mike, on that our role is to put forward a recommendation to the General Assembly. Now, as they get lobbied or they, and maybe we can even get some more research done, it might change. But I think at this point in time, I too support what's to track what the federal's recommendations are.
I don't think we've had a second to my motion. You want to make it a chair and co-chair a motion and second?
Well, it's probably going to be the only time we agree. So sure, I'll second it.
Okay.
All right, we have a seconded motion. I'm tempted to jump straight into voting on it, but yeah, Eric, go ahead.
Just one. Well, it's not that little actually. I just find these a little small, especially for those LMI individuals that aren't going to be getting a larger federal tax rebate. So my suggestion is making sure that when they get into the dealership, and I think they're getting a full 7,500 plus this 2,500. If they don't qualify for the full 7,500 from the feds, then Maryland will make up that difference. So at the least, this is already way lower than what the consultants kind of recommended for affordable.
Well,
what if we cover that difference so that it's not too devastating to get in there thinking you're getting 10K and instead gonna get only 5,000.
Mike, am I right that this recommendation is focused only on the base rebate
Yes.
and not the LMI bonus?
Yeah, the LMI, I assume we're going to discuss in a minute, and there'll be
Oh,
more as well.
I was under the impression this was replacing the other two. I take back everything I said. Sweet.
Yeah, because I was imagining Elizabeth's reaction if what you did is gave more rebates to people who did not manufacture the vehicles in the U.S.
Yeah, you probably can.
I think we got a motion and a second.
Great. Okay. Well then, we are going to use the little hand raise feature for some quick counting here. If you support the recommendation that the state adopt a clean vehicle rebate program using the same federal income limits, all EVs would qualify. It would be a point of sale rebate, and it would not exceed $2,500 for a new EV or $1,000 for a used EV. And if you're an MWG member, then please vote by using the little hand raise feature, and I'll count these votes here. All right, definitely have enough yeses there. All righty. Great. Then let's discuss the LMI bonus. And if you go ahead and lower your hands if you are voting, then that'd be great, so that if you have new questions regarding the LMI bonus, we can address those. So the LMI bonus, so now we're recommending that there be a base amount of up to those levels, and then if you are at 80% or below of area median income, which again is about $90,000 for a family of 4 in Maryland on average, then you would qualify for an additional bonus. We heard this recommendation from the consultants. One thing I want to note that in the consultants report, they've suggested different levels for those who live at or below 80% AMI versus 60% AMI. 60% of course being lower income, qualifying for additional incentive. What we also heard from the MWG, the interest in simplifying everything and also aligning with other state programs. So what we did was kind of chose a midpoint in those ranges. Now this was building on the idea of 2,500 base rate plus $5,000 if you're LMI for a new vehicle. So that's a total state incentive of up to $7,500 for all qualified people who would be those at or below 80% AMI, right? So we were finding sort of the midpoint in the consultant's recommendation between the 80% versus the 60% AMI for simplicity's sake. Any discussion you want on this recommendation? Yep, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I think we ought to definitely do an LMI bonus. I'm once again conscious of the budgetary impact. And one thought that occurs to me is that at a lower to moderate income and therefore a lower priced vehicle, probably less money goes further. That's a speculation on my part, but on a less expensive car with less income, I would think you might be able to get by with a little bit less money. So I was wondering if we simply made it, rather than twice the clean vehicle rebate we recommended, if it would just match the clean vehicle rebate, so LMI could get double rebate rather than triple rebate, if you will, might not be sufficient.
And this question, I guess, might be for the consultants on the line. Those LMI rebate amounts, if I remember correctly, they were targeted to reduce was it the annualized cost of transportation to be approximately 10% of the household budget? Am I remembering that that's kind of how you landed on the numbers?
I believe that that's correct.
And was there any assumption about the LMI population purchasing EVs at a lower price point, like, you know, the $30,000 price point that we see with, for instance, the Chevy Bolt versus the average EV price point?
That goes beyond what I know. Is Dave Roberts on the call? Maybe he can answer.
Let's see, I do see Dave on the call. Dave, any chance you can unmute and do you happen to know if for the LMI program, if there was an assumption around the price point for the EV that's being purchased, and was it any different from just the average price point?
Yes, so hopefully you can hear me. I'm trying to unmute. Hi folks, Dave Roberts, VIC. I'm just trying to look, see if you give me a minute or two, I might be able to dig that up and put a note in the chat. But I think that it was based on sort of an average vehicle purchase price for a new car. But I will see if I can dig up some additional information. So thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks so much for looking into that as we go here. Jennifer.
Yes, the first proposal, which just passed, was a $300 million approximate cost. How much would this new proposal add to that?
$395.
So
actually, yeah, it wasn't a 300 million. It was no more than 300 million.
That's right. So the General Assembly and our recommendation would basically bring down those incentive levels to match, I guess, the budget target. The LMI bonus separately is right now projected to be 155 million a year, and that's assuming that 100%. Oh, actually, I don't. We might also need input from the consultants before I tell you the assumptions on this, but I think that the assumption might be that all LMI car buyers would be receiving the rebate. Well, if Dave or Russ, if you remember your assumptions that built out that 155 million, that would, I shouldn't be speculating.
Sorry, there's nothing I have top of mind. I can do a little research though.
Okay, thanks. So while they look at the vehicle price question, are there other comments generally about the LMI bonus program? Garrett.
I think my comment is just that we generally very much support doing this. I actually was going to say the opposite, though. From what we heard from Mike, my assumption is that this is not going to be enough money to. I'm wondering if we'll actually see usage of this and end up spending as much money as we're projecting here. Because yes, hopefully folks will be able to buy slightly less expensive vehicles, but we're talking about a segment of folks who have a lot less money available to spend on buying a new vehicle. And my thinking is that this is not going to be enough money to end up covering that gap, and it's not going to be sufficient to motivate. And I think, unfortunately, so I think on principle, I think we should absolutely be spending a differentially higher incentive to support low to moderate income households to purchase these vehicles. I think we should do the same thing when we're helping folks with energy efficiency improvements, electrification improvements, renewable energy improvements, on down the line. That principle should always apply. And the reality we run into is it can be cost prohibitive to actually offer enough money to really close the gap that folks experience. Even if it seems like maybe on paper it should work out. So it's a long way of saying I support this. I'm not confident that these numbers are gonna work. I'd be more worried about underspending than overspending here. I do think it's very important that if we're going to offer it, that folks again have certainty that it's available. And I think we talked about that last time, and I see there's a note in here that the state would potentially send out coupons that folks would bring with them as presumably like one attempt at how could we create certainty for folks, because it really won't be helpful if folks can't be confident that the rebate money will be available at the time. But I am also doubtful that we're going to be able to make better predictions about exactly, like we did in the last one, how much money could be offered and how will that really affect how many additional vehicles are purchased. It sounds like it's going to be very difficult to make those kinds of predictions. So to me, it's one of those things that it'd be worth trying. And I imagine that the legislature and this committee will probably want to reflect on what kind of uptake we see, and do we continue to do this? Do we change the amounts in the future, et cetera? Whatever we land on here, we should try with an assumption that we're going to learn a lot and need to change it probably after a couple of years of trying it.
And on one hand, I hear, we don't know what the uptake would be. Be good to try this out. Which to me, I start thinking, well, maybe then a more modest budget for a pilot would be suitable. But I also hear your point that you don't want to underfund this. You don't want to give false hope. and do all this outreach and inform people about the benefit and then not be able to provide it. So yeah, I hear you on those struggles. Mike?
Yeah, just to comment on Brian's, because it is a concern. I looked at this and I thought, if the purpose is really low income rather than moderate income, we're really talking about people who are not likely to be buying new cars, but more likely to be buying used cars. And we're not going to have a significant used car market in EVs for several years. And we're really talking this about a jump start only for the early years, right? Once we have a lot of EVs on the road, we don't need to be giving people incentives, or we have a mandate that most EVs be. So it's kind of it's an odd situation where you want to incentivize purchases that that we're going to be relatively few of supply available. I still would probably favor, though, offering this and figure if it doesn't get taken up, it doesn't get taken up because there's not a supply. But at least we've made the effort to, from an environmental justice standpoint. I just I think the 5 and the 3 is too high in comparison to what the need might be, but I do think we should probably have something. But it's a very legitimate concern.
And Dave put in the chat, thank you very much for that. Dave from BEIC, that the sales points were based on some of the more modestly priced EVs. So $30,000 for a new EV, which is roughly the Chevy Bolt price point, or Nissan Leaf, and $20,000 for a used EV. Let's see. I see Elizabeth Bunn.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I think I'm off mute. Yeah, I agree with the concerns that have just been raised, and just would throw something out. Maybe it's too little, too late, but you know, another way, or maybe an additional way to address low and moderate income, and actually this whole issue overall, is to look at providing some incentives for charging infrastructure, at least for those. I mean, we do it for multifamily residences in a different section, but even for you know, homeowners, that's going to be another disincentive to going electric. So that might be something to look at as well.
Just a point of information, there is a rebate program. I think it's up to $700 for home charging equipment currently.
Yeah,
but it's
right.
700. Whether that will cover the cost depends very much on your local situation. If you need a new panel or need to run a line to a disconnected garage, it's not going to be enough. If you've already got a 20 volt, 240 volts outlet in your garage, it's more than enough, but situations will vary.
Yeah, and that's a tax rebate though, is it, or is it point of sale?
No, it's not point of sale.
Yeah, see, I was thinking point of sale. But.
Gotcha.
Deputy Secretary Dorsey.
You're muted, Suzanne.
Thank you. I just want to push back on the assumption that LMI folks are you know, disproportionately buying used cars. I think that's an assumption that needs to be tested and questioned. I think you know, we need to be careful with that, and we even need to be careful with assuming price points. I again just caution that as we move forward through this.
Thanks. Did I see another hand come up? Maybe it went up and down. So I don't know if, Mike, you were edging toward a motion to change the limits on that.
I can try to frame this for discussion purposes, that we offer an LMI income bonus based upon 80% of area median income, as it says here, that it be all EVs for simplicity's sake, that with the price limits that the feds have for EVs, and that we recommend it be not larger than, and I'm cutting the numbers here, 2,500 for new vehicles and 1,500 for used vehicles. That's a proposal just for discussion purposes.
Sorry, tell me those numbers again.
It's basically half of what you have there. So rather than 5,000, it's 2,500. Rather than 3, it's 1,500. And that, it's really for budget purposes, because I don't think they're going to come anywhere close to the 2,500 and 1,000 that we've proposed. So I'm proposing half of that for LMI.
Got it.
And then at some point we have to come back to Kim's idea about how to pay for this. But for now, as a separate, I'll keep that out of this motion.
Yeah, well, there's also the logistical issue that we have one MWG meeting left in October that's on the schedule to really conclude the recommendation making for the MWG this year to forward recommendations to the commission. We already have some other topics on that agenda to frame up an additional recommendation that we've asked for. So at the current pace, unless you scheduled additional meetings, we're unlikely to reach votes on even the recommendations that are on the draft recommendation sheet that we sent out for this meeting.
Mark, I think we're going to have to look at additional meetings. There's just too much. So maybe we can work with staff to find some dates.
Great. All right, so we've got a motion that is essentially keeping it, I think, as it's written, but changing the maximum rebate to 2,500 for a new vehicle and 1,500 for a used vehicle. Is there a second on that motion?
I'll second it.
All right. Any conversation, debate on that motion? Yep, Garrett.
I would vote for a version of this where we keep the numbers that were in the blue chart, but I'm opposed to watering it down in advance. I agree with the comment I see from Josh in the chat. I doubt the General Assembly will indeed fund this fully, but I just don't think the numbers we even have in the blue chart are probably enough, and I certainly don't think cutting them half is going to be enough to end up accomplishing much. So I won't vote for this version of it.
All right, Michelle.
I was going to say the same thing, Garrett. I would propose to keep the numbers as is in the chart and let the legislator decide on what the actual funding levels will be.
Thank you. Jamal?
I agree and would vote to keep the numbers as they are.
Okay. Mike, any wish to?
I think the way I'd want to proceed is vote on my motion. If it fails, then someone can make a proposal for a new motion at the original amounts.
All righty, then let's just jump to a vote. We only have 10 minutes left in this meeting. So you would be voting on this motion to reset these maximum rebate amounts to $2,500 for a new EV and $1,500 for a used EV for the LMI bonus. Please use the little hand raise feature if you support that motion. Okay, I don't think that we have the votes to support the motion. Should we vote on the original version of the recommendation then?
Yeah, you'd need to, because I'll vote against it. So you need to see whether you got enough votes for the original.
Alrighty.
Can I ask one quick question, Mark? The question about, some kind of tax or fee or whatever that we wanted to punt. I mean, it is related in some way, right, to this. Like there might be an idea to link them somehow. So I don't want to get in the way of a vote. I just wanted to put that out there that could be part of the conversation.
you could propose that with the funding, it be increased, I guess.
Darren?
Yeah, can I just ask a quick clarification about this to make sure that this concern is unfounded? I love the idea of a preferential rebate for low to moderate income consumers. I'm a little worried about incentivizing consumers who have no car and live in a dense urban environment that would be better served by transit, or who have one car and live in that environment, moving up to owning a car or owning two cars because of this kind of incentive. Is that off the mark? Is this not going to increase car ownership overall, but instead going to actually help turn the fleet over?
I guess one thought that crossed my mind as I was writing these little implementation notes here is that if this is coupon based, and in fact, if the state is proactively sending the coupons to income qualified households, because that's data that the state has, then it could be limited to one coupon per household. That doesn't fully address the issue of a single household taking advantage of, the purchase of multiple new or used vehicles. So it's not a perfect answer to the question, but with that limit, it would somewhat be a control on that.
Yeah, I wonder if consultants are on, because another way to put the question is, we want policy to drive turnover to a clean fleet, not policy to drive additional car ownership. I assume that's the case.
So the linkage could be back to the trade-in requirement, which has its own challenges.
You might, given that we got 8 minutes left, you might want to vote on this. If it passes, then we've got this done. If it fails, then you may want to reconsider my motion. So it might be a good idea to get a vote on this.
All righty, let's do it. So we're going to vote on the section in blue as is, the low to moderate income bonus, which provides $5,000 point sale rebate for new, 3,000 point sale rebate for used. That would stack on top of whatever would be authorized under the base rebate program, but available only to those who are living at or below the 80% of area median income. So you take to the little hand raise feature if you support as written in the recommendation sheet. I think that carries. Let me do the inverse vote. So if you'd all lower your hands just to confirm if you would vote no to this as proposed, then please raise your hands. All right. So then the yeses have it. So the recommendation stands as written. We have 5 minutes left, and I guess to the co-chairs, how do you want to proceed? Do you want to start in for a couple of minutes here on super user or entertain Kim's suggestion of fees for new registrations on gas vehicles?
I would suggest that Kim frame the issue that she wanted to raise, given that we may not finish either one till next, but at least we've got it on the agenda, if she's prepared to be able to add to the proposal.
Okay, well, I was going to recommend the opposite, but okay.
Right. Well,
That's all right. I'm happy to. I mean, and this is a bit spontaneous on my part, but obviously the success of all these recommendations are dependent upon revenue. And any work that we can do to provide some possibilities towards that will help advance these policies. So as we look at, putting those together, either I'd probably suggest we we present them together, but they be actually separate recommendations, so that they stand alone a little bit. And my thought was on the registration fee to add additional costs for the fossil fuel combustion engines, which we are trying to disincentivize, right? So this is kind of a +2 in my mind, because we're providing money to incentivize the EVs while disincentivizing ICs just by an increase in registration fees. So the thing I don't have is, the revenue estimate on that. I have to do a little bit more research on it. So that's the concept. And then I'm happy to, at the next meeting, come in with a fleshed out recommendation around that, if people are giving me a thumbs up on that.
All right. Let's see if we got hands up from Tom.
Sure. I just have a question. I think I remember past recommendation from us, or maybe it was in one of the commission's reports for a low carbon fuel standard for motor vehicle fuels. Is that still valid or in play? Is it a possibility that you'll bring that forward as one of the initiatives during the next legislative session? Because that's also a potential vehicle to fund the uptake of EVs.
I guess help us understand. The low carbon fuel standard would be a funding mechanism because it would.
That was already a recommendation, unless I'm mistaken, that we made in a previous year that would head in the same direction, right? So if it's still a recommendation that's under consideration, for me, it would interplay with a decision about a registration fee.
Maybe Tom, before the next meeting, you can dig it out. That rings a bell that we did, but if you could dig it out and provide it, we can circulate it before the next meeting to refresh people's recollection. Would that help? Because I think I do remember something on that.
But Mark, no.
I'm also trying to recall what the commission recommended in the past on that. I'll have to look into it and bring it back.
We're running out of time. I'll drop.
Okay, thanks. Tim.
Yeah, just real quick. This goes back to Kim's suggestion about the registration to provide funding. About 2022 session, Delegate Fraser Hidalgo did submit a bill that would have taxed probably what gross emitters is basically a gas guzzler tax, but the tax on these higher polluting vehicles, Chevy Suburbans and so forth, and that money that received from that tax was supposed to go towards an EV fund. So that is something we could look at. I can pull the bill out, but it was pretty sure it was from the 22 session, but it mirrored the federal government's gas guzzler tax pretty much. It was based on carbon, but it was basically a gas guzzler tax. So that might be an option if we were looking at what Kim suggested.
So we're a minute from 3. We can, I guess the staff will work with co-chairs to flesh this out and bring it back for discussion for the next meeting. But I don't want to hold people any later than necessary. It's already been a 2-hour meeting. So co-chairs, any closing remarks and thoughts on next steps as the MWG tries to finalize its recommendations this year?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think that thank you to everybody for great conversation. We'll look at this and do a little bit of homework. Plan on additional meetings, I'm guessing, maybe 1 or 2 more, so we can actually have thoughtful conversations about these recommendations. So, yeah.
I wanted to echo thank everybody for digging into this. I think we made real progress today. I would suggest, Jennifer, a note I was going to make to you. You might want to look at the suggestions that the ECO work group is making on publicizing EVs, because there may be some duplication between what you're proposing here and what they're actually recommending to the commission. So we'll try to connect you up that. But thanks everybody for the hard work today.
Agreed. Thanks so much, and we'll be in contact regarding future meetings. Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.